Ladies and gentlemen, you can never learn anything from somebody you agree with, and so here at the Great Debaters Contest, we encourage disagreement. I am your host, Esperancia Kapanga.
And I am Chris Buru. Debating on a matter that has affected our country, we have Goshen girls who will be opposing the motion that says, poor disaster management and preparedness are to blame for the recent rain havoc that has plagued Kenya.
Proposing this motion, we have Anestar Boys Bahati High School.
Proposer number 1, you have 3 minutes to make a statement.
Alvin Gigekebwe from Anestar Boys Bahati is here to strongly propose and convince you on the motion that says poor disaster management and preparedness is to blame for the recent rain havoc that has plagued Kenya. Let me take you straight on board by explaining the key terms: disaster, preparedness, havoc, management, and plague. Disaster is something such as floods, tornado, fire, or a plane crash that happens suddenly and brings much destruction, while preparedness is the state of being ready for something. Havoc is the general destruction or a situation to which there is much destruction, while management is the act or the skill of controlling, while plague is the aftermath brought by disaster. So let us see why the motion is so true. Torrential rains have uprooted very many people from their home places all across East Africa in the recent weeks, creating a humanitarian disaster that is threatening lives, Kenya not excluded. And this is evident through the poor disaster management and preparedness strategies that Kenya has led to a vicious cycle that has tormented us for far too long. It has been aired and posted on the Star Kenya newspaper and CNN on the May 5th, 2018, that sections of Nairobi have been submerged under rainwater, and these same floods have displaced over 260,000 people and killed 100 others in at least 15 of the country's 47 counties. It is proof enough that our own capital city is going through this aftermath due to lack of proper management, due to lack of good management disaster strategies. So planning and high management strategy will not have led to business wreckage, to refugee camps being displaced, to the closing of 200 schools back in Turkana. Those are so many schools that have been closed. And so you can bear with me that in the aftermath of these rains, they have bring a lot of chaos. These floods, due to lack of good management, has led to roads are deemed impassable, and the rivers burst their bank, blocking any humanitarian efforts that have blocked very infrastructure that has blocked the building of the country. This is not good. And so I would say that such climatic conditions have also affected the pastoralists back in Samburu, back in Turkana, back in Pokot. They have affected. And these pastoralists are losing their herds, excavating hunger and poverty to them because they lose these herds to these floods. And so the saddest part is that a community that exerted effort to develop and strengthen livelihood and build infrastructure can lose that all in but one rainfall. Really? And then we say we prepare well. Thank you.
First opposer, you have 3 minutes for your examination in chief.
More than 700 people have been displaced in Taita Taveta County. A lorry with 5 people on board was swept away by River Nzui in Kitui County. 2 people, including a Class 6 girl, killed by floods in Kajiado County. I agree that this is a disaster. And if there's something we're going to come to a consensus with, is that this is a havoc that Kenya is having right now. However, I beg to differ, where my worthy opponents are trying to blame poor disaster management and preparedness for this. I'm going to blame it on ignorance and irresponsibility. From the Goshen Sacred Girls High School, I go by the name Karanja Damaris. Well, we have adequate information that is provided by meteorologists. This means that in Kenya, we have expert meteorologists. Take an instance, in the month of April, they predicted that the heavy rains are expected to continue until June. And yes, we can see that we are embracing this. Kenya has taken measures such as it's allocating funds. A report by the Standard Magazine on 5th May 2018 shows that the government has set aside 60 billion shillings for relief. Aside from that, it has also set aside 17.5 million shillings for infrastructural kitty, whereby the infrastructure that is destroyed by these floods is repaired. At county level, we can see that this is also being dealt with. Take an instance of the Nairobi County, which has set aside 194 million shillings for this, and yet we still blame Kenya for not preparing well. Moreover, the government is also building mega dams. These are dams that have a large capacity to hold the rainwater, these heavy rains, so that it will prevent flooding. A good example is the Dwake Dam in Kitui County, which has been set aside for 36.9 billion shillings. And mind you, it's the largest dam in East Africa so far. This dam has a capacity of 174 million liters of water, and we can see that Kenya is really taking steps to manage this disaster. Furthermore, we have irresponsibility by our citizens, whereby they dispose their plastic bottles carelessly. NEMA Director Geoffrey Wamkungu said, and I quote him, "I can confidently say that plastic carrier bags have significantly reduced. What is causing the blockage is the plastic bottles. As Kenya, we took the step, and the NEMA abolished the plastic paper bags. However, the citizens are still not doing what they're supposed to. When you're talking about management and preparedness, it begins with me and you. This is a wake-up call for Kenya. Dispose your bottles nicely." Thank you.
Second proposer, you have 3 minutes for cross-examination.
I am Brian Yabari from Anestar Bahati, here to propose the motion that states poor disaster management and preparedness are to blame for the recent rain havoc that has plagued Kenya. On what my fellow opponent has talked about the deaths in Taita Taveta and more disasters, let's check on their causes. First, we lack a disaster management policy. Experts have in the past attributed poorly coordinated and unnecessarily expensive disaster response in Kenya to the lack of a disaster management policy. Such a policy will facilitate the creation of a national disaster management authority to coordinate all institutions' activities management in disaster prevention, mitigation, and response. On the 18th of April 2018, the Deputy President, William Ruto, announced that he will establish a bill in Parliament that will focus on the establishment of a National Disaster Management Authority. The authority will help to correct the current approach, which is based on guesswork and is often erroneous. Secondly, we have poor infrastructure. Poor infrastructure and complete absence of roads in some settlements has made rescue and relief efforts difficult, costly, and risky for aid workers. These words were said by a Kenya Red Cross disaster response team official who wished to remain anonymous. The official also added that the central government and the county government should work hand in hand in bettering infrastructure in places that face calamities like flood, hunger, and conflicts, since it's more costly to contain disasters than to prevent them. A good example is in the Tana River Delta area, where roads had been rendered impassable and military helicopters had to be used to airlift dozens of people marooned by flood waters. Thirdly, we have flood-affected families in Kenya have been curtailed by lack of a disaster management body, poor coordination, and poor rural infrastructure, as I've just stated above. In a report published by IRIN, a news agency focusing on humanitarian news, on the 24th April 2013, at least 89,515 Kenyans were displaced by floods. 62 people were killed and scores more were injured. The floods caused by heavy rains in mid-March and early April affected areas in central, northeastern, western, and not forgetting our own capital city, Nairobi. Therefore, I'd like to conclude that if the government and the people had adequately prepared, effects of the flooding will not have been seen. Thank you.
Second opposer, you have 3 minutes for re-examination.
Serikali saidia, kuna matata. When are we going to stop this melodrama? I mean, the government is doing enough by funding the people. It has set aside 60 billion shillings for relief, as stated by my fellow opposer. We should take responsibility as Kenyans. I mean, who is Kenya? Kenya is you and me. I, Ruth Wanza, from the Goshen Sacred Fraternity, agreed to disagree with my opponents. You've talked about not having enough agencies. Kenya has agencies. For example, we have the National Environmental Agency, we have St. John Ambulance, we have Department of Defense, including the Army, and National Disaster Operations Center, which deal with disaster management. Now, the government has also allocated 17.5 million shillings for infrastructural kitty, and the infrastructural development is being looked upon. For an instance, here in Nakuru, the roads are being made. Is that wrong? In addition to our points, there's poverty among us Kenyans. The government should be helping us as Kenyans. I mean, it has the ability to help us to eradicate poverty. But since we are poor, as the government asks us to shift, I mean, we do not shift. We cannot shift because we don't have enough resources to help us allocate, to help us move to other places, safer places. Corruption in Kenya. The government has funded the people who have the mandate to look upon the management of disposal issues. But then, what are we doing about it? The money is being funded, yes, but we are diverting the funds to other ministries which will not help with disaster management. I do not blame poor disaster management and preparedness for the rain havoc that has plagued Kenya. I blame ignorance by the people as well, because we have brains, but we are not using them as we should. Like the Solai Dam, people saw that the dams were cracking, but what did they decide to do? They sat there to wait for the dam to burst, and the flood caught up with them. Is poor disaster management and preparedness to be blamed? No. Thank you.
The proposers have been asked to give measures that can be taken by the government and the people themselves to protect the citizens from the disasters happening in the country. And the opposers have been asked if we did have measures in place measures for disaster management, then would these calamities still happen? Proposer number 3, you have 3 minutes to answer the question.
I am John Kamau from the Anestar Boys Bahati, here to propose the motion that states poor disaster management and preparedness are to blame for the recent rain havoc that has plagued Kenya. Now, to answer the question that was asked, in addition to, we definitely should have the creation of disaster funds, disaster contingency plans, and insurance initiatives, among other measures. Kenya can do a lot to help prevent flood-related disasters. For instance, Kenya must improve our flood warning systems, giving people more time to be able to take action during flooding. Other than that, advanced warning and pre-planning can significantly reduce the impact from flooding. Secondly, residents should not build their settlements near rivers or other water bodies, as these areas are prone to flooding very easily. Other than that, increasing the spending of flood defenses with the aid of the Red Cross, which can clearly be seen by the recent activities that have taken place to help those affected. Onwardly, the government should relocate people away from floodplains. Floodplains are located in low-lying areas, and this should be taken with immediate action. And lastly, temporary barriers can also be added to permanent flood defenses, such as raised embankments, increasing the chances and the level of protection. As the threat and frequency of flood risk increases, the use of passive field defenses has to be the only realistic long-term solution that we have. Now, on to my first point. Disaster response in Kenya is often inadequate and characterized by failure to act on early warnings. Other than that, as it was said by my fellow proposer, the lack of a disaster management policy is attributed to poorly coordinated and unnecessarily expensive disaster responses in Kenya. From the recent happening of the Patel Solai Dam burst that wreaked havoc in the aftermath, the flooding damaged property and endangered the lives of humans. Now, a question unto you. If those who had built the Solai Dam had prepared well, then there wouldn't be regular checkups. by the water authorities. The dam should not have been built on a high land area where such a scenario, if happened, when a bursting would occur or a disaster would take place, then there would be runoff of water, creating a lot of disasters. And lastly, the people should also be advised not to build directly below the dams. This thing should have been noticed earlier on, and very simply, as she said on the other side, that they should have noticed the cracking, then they should have been prepared, they should have taken action and moved, or have stated to the government to help. Instead of us, we always say that poor disaster management and preparedness are what is disturbing Kenya and causing havoc. Now these dams, the Patel dams, have been there for over 20 years. It is only after the calamity that the authorities claimed that they were illegally constructed. Other than that, the government had to lend a hand to the Red Cross to support the affected. And finally, people have been affected by the floods, prompting the government to relocate hundreds of people. To be or not to be is a state of the art illusion of the mind. We make reality what it is and what we want it to be. Thank you.
Third opposer, you have 3 minutes to answer the question.
I'm Achilet Care from the Goshen Sacred Girls High School. And firstly, I'd like to answer the question that was asked by one of the audience. It was asked that if the policies or the proper measures were being put in place, could there have been calamities still happening? Well, the measures have been put in place. It's not that they haven't been put in place, but the people aren't making use of it. Because an incident of the floods in Nairobi, there is a responsibility, because what mainly caused it is the cloggage of the filter areas. And if we would have been responsible enough, we would have stopped that dumping. And that dumping is the one that is contributing to the deaths of thousands of people right now. Well, I hope you're satisfied with my answer. I'd like to add on the points of my colleagues. There are climatic conditions which are changing, which are beyond our control. This is majorly affecting us. Yes, we are prepared. With this management, it is helping by funding. It is adding on the funds. For example, the billions have been contributed to help these people. There are funding organizations like the non-governmental organizations, the Red Cross societies, and we are also talking of the St. John's ambulance. They help in hosting the homeless. Have you talked of the displacement? Well, they are also attending to the injured and even the search groups for the dead who are swept away by the floods. Well, about the poor infrastructure, we have signed a contract as Kenya with the China construction group named Gezuba. There is response to the affected areas. For example, the choppers, which have been sent to those affected areas to carry those injured to the hospitals. You can't say that there is poor disaster management. Well, we have done our homework well. If it's the marking, it is determined by us. If we learn to appreciate and quit pointing fingers, we can't make the management our scapegoat. We better read in between the lines unless we let the stupidity catch up with us. It's not over until it is over. When the madness of an entire nation disturbs a solitary mind, it is not enough to say that the man is mad. Therefore, I firmly oppose to this motion. I, Achilet Care, I am still the one and only Achilet Care who firmly opposes to this motion. From the Goshen Sacred Girls High School. Thank you.
Proposition, you have 1 minute for your final statement.
I will strongly oppose the motion by saying Kenya has not been preparing well for such situations, which in turn cause flooding. For instance, if the government had sent surveyors, experts, and planners, architects to places experiencing mudslides, for example, Muranga, they will have sampled the soil and advised the people on the best places to build on. Thank you.
Opposition, you have 1 minute for your closing statement.
A kingdom divided against itself is bound to fail. Kenya is us. Kenya is we the people. We are not supposed to be fast at pointing fingers. Kenya is love, and love is Kenya. we make it a better place, despite the fact that we are facing this crisis. We are not to blame for the poor disaster management and preparedness. Vision 2030 is yet to come, and I am quite sure that this is going to be for the sake of the future. Our people might be suffering, but it is not to blame on the poor disaster management. We are prepared. It is beyond our control, but we are working towards it to reduce the number of deaths that is happening right now. When misfortunes come, they come not as single spies, but as battalions. Let us share this blame. Let us appreciate these efforts that we are working to. We don't have to point fingers at the poor management, disaster management, because it is not the reason that we are facing this challenge. For the long gone, may the Almighty rest their souls in peace. I rest my case. Archlet Care from the one and only Goshen Sacred Girls High School. Thank you.
Gentlemen, very good work. And I'm especially impressed by the start, the way that you started, Alvin. You had everything set. Your mastery of language, passion, your mastery of the topic, and coherence of argument were very good. Keep that up. Brian, you're a good speaker. You're a very good speaker. Just add a little more variety of gestures, maybe here and there, to improve. And then your final submission, you didn't make full use of the time. That let you down a little. You'd have done better if you'd utilized the full minute, because that carries force. John, you speak the Queen's language. Your language is outstanding. You are wasting time. You should be teaching English somewhere. So keep it up, John. Damaris, the girls, very good work. The three of you did an equally commendable job. Now, Ruth, I want to point out that you started very forcefully. Very forcefully. I wish you had kept that up to the end. Towards the end, you wavered a little, and therefore didn't utilize your time, your 3 minutes fully. And that let your team down a little bit. Achilek, do not overread. Do not overread the information. Something that John too was doing, was reading a little bit. Address the audience, look at us, and talk to us. Also, your time management had some flow there. Both teams have researched very well. Keep it up. You are quoting figures and data and statistics to back your arguments. That is very good. You have high level of language skills, coherence, passion. So there is a lot to pick from both teams here. You have done very well. I wish you all the best.
To Anestar boys, the first debater, 200,000 people were displaced in Kenya. It's a fact. Source you did not give. Brian, experts have pointed out this and that, and you went ahead to say that. But who are those, all right? According to who? Nonetheless, please have in mind that you gave extra examples that were well validated, and you did well, okay? So these are some of the penalties that were given. John, excellent. I think you're a good debater. I have a feeling that if you now add a bit of variation on style for passion's sake, you'd make an excellent top debater, all right? So keep up that spirit and keep moving on. Goshen, Damaris, you took the day for me when it comes to citations, because there's nothing that you gave without validating it, and that was excellent. For you as a debater, that was well done. Ruth, the government has allocated this amount of money. Validate that, all right? You're a good debater, remember that, okay? But you just want to validate all the examples that you gave. However, the Solai example that you gave, they just sat there and waited. It's quite, could be a bit mean, all right? Yes, it was true. They could have seen the cracks and the likes, but how you want to put it across, it's in a way that is quite human because lives were lost, okay? Achille, good role playing. I think you came to farm up your team with very passionate endings. And I love the fact that you stood out to say that we should take responsibility. I think that was a very safe way of saying it's not about preparedness, but it's about ignorance. So I think that was a very creative way of debating. Let's wait for the results. It was tight.
Thank you, judges. After every intellectual debate, we must have a winner and a learner. The judges have seen fit to award Anestar Boys High School 71.5%. Let's clap for them. Goshen Sacred have been awarded 71%. Give them a round of applause. Hence making Anestar Boys the winners of this debate.
Congratulations to both teams. As to Goshen Girls Sacred High School, we want you to remember that often it's not in winning or in losing, it's in how you play the game, and you have definitely given Anestar Boys a run for their money. At the Grade Debaters Contest, that's it. Keep the conversation going on social media, #GDC for SDGs. I have been your host, Esperancia Kapanga.
And I am Chris Buru. Until next time, stay tuned.